and welcome to Silverstone Technology Cluster's Ask the Expert podcast. Today's episode is proudly brought to you by TC Group. I'm Jeannie, your host, and we are joined by Mike Jones. Mike's from LBI Consulting, so thank you for being here with us, Mike.
Oh, it's a pleasure. I look forward to chatting with you.
So let's get started by getting to know you a little bit better. Can you tell our listeners and our viewers a little bit about your background and how you got to your current role at LBI Consulting?
I'll keep it brief. I haven't always been this. I was a soldier for 18 years prior to this, which I thoroughly enjoyed. But unfortunately, I was diagnosed with PTSD probably about 8 years ago, which then I had to leave the army. I didn't really know what to do once I left the army, but I had a really good passion about leadership strategy. And fortunately, I qualified to become a organizational psychologist. So I set up my consultancy. Initially, I was in high performance sports, which I did enjoy. Done a lot for England rugby, but I didn't really find it that complex. So it was quite simple, really. And this is my argument, really, about using high performance sports as an analogy for business, but that's another story for another day. And then, so I moved into businesses. I'm also a systems thinker. So I merged psychology and systems thinking to look at a whole system. And I started progressing as I've worked for Network Rail, NHS, Amazon. So I mixed my time between private and public. Mainly in the strategy space. So I'm a sort of a strategy and execution advisor for large businesses. Really, when they have a real big problem, I tend to help solve it, enable them to be viable, get growth, reorganize their organization so that they can execute the strategy.
Wow, that's quite a journey. So let's dive into today's discussion. So given your background in both military leadership and business consulting, how has your perspective on strategy and execution evolved? And what key lessons from the military did you find most applicable?
So I was a bit shocked. So when I left the army, I assumed that, civilian organizations had, strategy sort of nailed. Especially execution. I would have thought, because they always talk about it. There's loads of books. I've got loads on my bookshelf here written about it. But I was surprised because I think there's a perception about the military and how we do strategies, and you'll see it on the news now. It's where it's all about, win-win. The sum of all costs. It's all about just battle, but that's not really how it works. And when I went into civilian organizations, I was really shocked by what I tend to see was just people, strategy gaming in the sense that they talk about strategy a lot, but all it really boils down to is lovely fun exercises, and all they come out with is a PowerPoint decks with superfluous statements on there, but don't really actually mean anything. They've got a great way of turning a strategy into looking like a house on a PowerPoint slide with a vision at the top, and then your pillars are your priorities, and then you've got some behaviors at the bottom, which is interesting, especially when you come from the military, and our view on strategy is very dynamic. Because the external environment isn't really thought of when you think about strategy that I've just talked about, but in the military it is. The external environment is everything, because we know that we are not there ourselves, and that everything we do will have an intended or unintended consequence in the external environment. So we're always conscious around what is happening. And then what do we need to do in manoeuvres term to get our fit with the external environment, but but being very much aware every time we do act, something's going to happen. And we have to constantly observe, reorientate, and then adapt if need be to be able to get to our intended aim.
Okay, so you talked a little bit there about strategic initiatives and their implementation. So between 50 and 90% of strategic initiatives fail during implementation. What do you see as the root cause of this high failure rate, and how can we address these issues?
Yeah, I normally say that the reason why, because when they developed the strategy, they didn't take into consideration the external environment. So they got false assumptions about what is actually true. So every time they then do something, is not matched the external environment and will fail. Two, that their strategy is predicated on predictability, stability, and what we call linear causality. So if I do this, this will happen. Is a set plan. And the third is that they try and control everything to the nth degree. Like everything is just mapped out on a perfect Gantt chart, milestones, the lot. And, if it slightly deviates, everyone gets really upset. So what happens in the organization is everyone lies, and they lie about the fact that they're missing the milestones, and they report green even though everything's red.
Okay.
And you get this massive disconnect within organizations. There are really three broad areas that we can delve more into it. But one thing I've seen quite a lot recently, which is and it's a bit of a question really around what comes first, the aspiration or the understanding of where you are. And what I mean by that is that people come up with this lovely aspiration. I want to be the best, or we're going to be this. And then they create a strategy off that. But it's disregard of anything that's actually real, or anything that's actually happening in life. You hear it, we're going to have a big visioning exercise, and all these people come along and stargaze, and then they'll make some stuff up that they think will sound great and look good on a publication. But what they're not doing is understanding where their current fit is in the external environment. So what is their situation? I'm not talking about SWOTs or those type things. They're maybe useful to some people. I'm a bit skeptical. But I'm thinking about who are all the key actors in the external environment. How are they? What's their disposition? How are they set up? Where's the value running the organisation? Where is that external environment going over time? Like, where is the energy taking it? What's causing it to go that way? And where's our fit? What does that mean to us? So where's our position and what's our relationship with that? Once we understand our relationship with that, we can then decide, well, if we do nothing, would we be happy where that takes us? If not, then, well, what do we do about that? And that then becomes the strategy of how you can maneuver. And you can think about what's your aspiration from that point. Where if you do it too soon, you're disregarding everything and you're just setting yourself up for failure. So
Okay. Yeah. So looking ahead, what skills or capabilities do you think will be the most crucial to develop in order to successfully execute strategies in this increasingly unpredictable business environment?
yeah, I think there's a good few things there. One is adaptability, and I use that quite in a broad term. But there needs to be a relationship between the leaders that have developed the strategy, and they know the strategy, and constantly observing with the external environment. With strategy, there's not, just because you're doing strategy doesn't mean everything changes, because there are some things that you already have the capability to do. So you give that direction and people can do that and they will act. And then you just need to ensure that that's happening. So it's always about feedback loops. And there are stuff that is change. So you need to change the organization. So these are broad areas that need to have good connections, good communications, and feedback loops to understand what's happening. And then as things, as we execute our strategy, we always look at sort of output and outcome metrics. So output, we're going to build this, or we're going to, do this. It's a very physical output that you can see. The outcome measures are, if we do this, what will we see differently happen? What are we expecting to see in the external environment as a result of what we're doing? And this is really important because this helps adaptability. Because as you're doing things, you're seeing and observing to see if this stuff happens. And if you're not seeing it happening and you're seeing something else happening, then that then gives you warning to start adapting. All right, something's not working. So let's reorientate what's going on, re-give direction, and that communication is up there. And that should help in that more adaptable sense, would help, less of the corporate lying, people saying it's not working, and do that. And the other part is what we call freedom of action. So providing freedom of action for people. So I'm ex-military. I love the philosophy Mission Command. Anyone that follows me on LinkedIn will know I talk about Mission Command a lot. But it's a great philosophy. Really what that's saying is that I'm going to give you clear intent and I'm going to trust you to deliver within boundaries of the intent and boundaries of the constraints. But you've got the freedom of action to adapt. And what I'm not doing is telling you exactly how to do something, because if I do that, then you're never going to meet the rate of change that you're going to face. So I'm going to tell you what I want. How you deliver that, that's up to you.
Okay.
Because you're in the context, you'll see, well, I now need to achieve that, but this has happened, so I just slightly adapt this and I can achieve it. And you'll start to close that gap between actions and outcomes.
Okay, and from your perspective, when you're going into a new strategy or a new project, what's your information gathering process? How do you do that? How do you identify the challenges? How do you look at the market and help people to understand where they sit in the environment? Because that's, like you said, such an important part of the strategy. It's not where you want to go, it's understanding where you currently are and what you can do to better your position. What's your information gathering process?
Well, there's always two elements to this, broad elements. There's every leader holds two models, one of the external environment and one of the internal environment. So what the actual organization is capable of doing, because they both feed into the strategy. Because I could come up with this strategy, it would be great, but then if internally we have no hope of be able to achieve that, but we can adapt it, or we know that so they've got those. So on the internal side, that's on the onus on the leaders to make sure that they are actually stepping down several layers to really understand what is going on in the organization. So when they are trying to develop strategy, their model in which they're using to make decisions is congruent with reality. Don't just rely on what you're getting fed upwards, because it may not be the whole truth of what's going on. Externally, well, there's, again, it depends how much they want to look into it. So there's futures. So we always look at futures and foresights. So what you could broadly bring that down to pestles, so the political, economical, social, or technology, or all those things. But what we're looking for is the early warning signs for change. So what are all these early warning signs for change? And really, if these things start to happen, what are the plausible scenarios of the future? So in this point, you see this, especially a lot of the LinkedIn influence type people will get this wrong because they talk about a future, not plausible futures. I mean that they like to project a dystopian view of the future, that if you don't do this, this is going to happen. And they talk about a future, where we talk about multiple futures. Like, these are the early warning signs. These are plausible what can happen. Then you sort of look at the external environment, and you really want to look at, who are the key actors, the suppliers, competition, partnerships, all those things, and roughly what do we think that they are doing? What strategies are they playing? What's the sort of flow of information and value that's happening? Where's the governance coming from? What may be happening in the governance of that external environment? So all these, there's loads of stuff that you could do, and when you're doing it for the first time properly, it feels like a lot. Yeah, but really, if you do it and you're seeing strategy as a consistent thing, it's not that much to just adapt over time. So does that roughly answer your question?
Yeah, no, it does. It's just it's very interesting to think about the way that people build strategy, and it's an ever-changing environment. Do you see any big changes on the horizon? Do you see any big developments in the future that are really going to affect the way people approach strategy?
Well, you only got to look at catalysts like Trump at the moment. Love him or hate him, he's a catalyst. But what that means is he brings a lot more volatility into the system. So what that means is then in terms of adaptability, agility in your strategy, they've got to be paramount. And I hate this sort of trope, but it's the only consistent is change. It's one of those things, but really it's your I suppose when we think about agility is essentially saying I've got spare resources to quickly move around, and to retask to do something, and that gives us that point. If you haven't got agility, you haven't got the spare resources, like a lot of the listeners probably won't, because either they're going quite lean because they're in that sort of manufacturing stage, or they're rarely new or small business, they don't really have that. Then foresight is their friend. They've got to look out, and they've got to start seeing the future in a sense for multiple lenses of what could happen, and then look at their organization or their aspirations and go, how would I do essentially under those different scenarios? And you can see there'll be common elements of your business that will be fine. There's certain elements that aren't. Then you need to then ask yourself, well, what would I need to see to show me that there is something changing that I need to be concerned about? And start mapping it out.
It really comes back to that adaptability, doesn't it? And being able to adapt to different outcomes, to different futures, and to different scenarios, which seems like the most important theme here.
Yeah, I think that, but unfortunately, a lot of businesses are so insular. They're so fixed on this. We've had it for, people have dined out on it for years around efficiency. We've got to
Yeah.
be efficient. Got to be efficient. Actually, you can be so efficient that you're now too weak to do anything. So you need a bit of fat in the system to be able to weather some of those storms.
Yes.
And efficiency just drives you to look internally and then think that you can solve all your problems by cutting 10% here or 20% there, make yourself more efficient. And you then neglect anything strategic.
Yeah. So that's actually been a really interesting and enlightening conversation today, Mike. I really appreciate it. Thank you for your time.
Oh no, it's been a pleasure.
And to everyone listening or watching, thank you for tuning in. Be sure to subscribe to STC's podcast and stay tuned for future episodes.